Yeah, you're right, Lee. 2020, man, wow, what a year. The first thing that comes to mind is when this all came down in March. I was never really too concerned. I never was worried like, oh my God, the sky is falling like Chicken Little. So one of the first things we did, as many of the folks that you know in higher ed, was pivoting from face to online very, very quickly. And I was so pleased with the resiliency first of our staff. We have a staff of 45 that work in the college in various roles, how quickly we adapted. And I really think that's a function, Lee, of the mindset of working in a self-support college. I mean, 100% self-support. So we have to be nimble, we have to be agile, and we have to be able to adapt and react. So I was very proud, A, of the staff. Secondly, part of the equation are students. How quickly the students came along with us on this journey. There was a lot of consternation on campus and concern that perhaps students wouldn't want to take online courses, particularly in even our college. When we moved a lot of programs online, all of a sudden we started seeing the registrations tick up, tick up, tick up. We were anticipating probably a 20% hit financially when my business officer and I sat down and looked at the numbers. And I got to tell you, Lee, almost a year later, we're actually in the black and we're trending that way. So the resiliency of students, despite the pandemic, what that spoke to me, Lee, was students have confidence and are encouraged by attending their online classes. And they see that earning a degree or a credential or a certificate still has value to them. Now, what the long term holds, I don't know. We'll have to see what retention looks like semester over semester. But to wrap up the first thought, 2020 was crazy, but I was very happy with how quickly we adapted internally, how quickly the students adapted. And I will tell you one last thing, I call it the canary in the coal mine. We run the special sessions for the university, meaning courses that are offered at winter break, spring break, and summer. And we actually have higher enrollments this year in winter than we did last year. And last year was pre-pandemic. So again, highly encouraged. Spring intersession is looking great. Last summer enrollments in the pandemic, we had higher than normal enrollment. So again, I'm very happy the students have come along, and I'm very pleased with how it's going so far, despite everything.
I think if 2020 taught us anything, I think we can throw out that old school of thought around higher education's not being agile, right? I think we were able to step up and be very agile when it counted and when we needed to be. I don't think since last March there's one area on campus that hasn't been re-examined about how we operate or serve students, to include, policies, for example, like grading or course scheduling, admissions criteria, placements, even employment, and how employees at the university work. Commencement. The university was really fortunate. We were able to pull off very successful commencement ceremonies at the start of December, at the end of our fall semester. Had to stretch those out across 10 ceremonies, but it's meaningful experiences like that that mean a lot to parents and, of course, our graduating students. I also think that perhaps 2020 has increased the sense around the value of technology and how it can be used in the classroom or in service areas. I think of our increased ability to use live chat. Maybe it's even synchronous learning with Zoom or recorded lecture with Panopto. And I hope that technology and what we experienced back in spring of 2020 that continues through fall and obviously this spring of 2021 has led to some meaningful conversations in academic units and what the impact of that will be long term, from lessons learned, and with kind of a real eye on, increasing the quality, because I don't think what we churned out probably in March when we all went remote in some sense could be defined as quality. But I think long term, enhancing that experience for students. And then I think, of course, more focus on innovation in the classroom and how we deliver that to students in the future. One other thought I had around kind of some reflections on last year. I think the gap year it's real, and we undertook an exercise to review our applicant pool from the last class. We ran it through the clearinghouse and realized that over 30% of our applicants didn't go anywhere this past fall. And, I think some of that probably might be indicative of our institution, UCM, being, a regional public institution, because much of our class is Pell eligible, of a minority background or first generation, like myself. And even perhaps, affordability could be the tipping point for why we're seeing increased gap year. I also kind of question whether or not it's, years of rhetoric about not everybody needing a college degree has taken a toll or undermined, public trust in higher education. And then I think of our, kind of the student impact on programs and our ability to move forward continually meeting students' internship needs with employers. And they've also had to go to remote work. So how do we continue those opportunities for students, both in clinical and non-clinical internship placements?
Asking in a very tight environment what the last 11 months have been like is a little bit like asking Abraham Lincoln how his time at the theater was the night he was assassinated. There's been an awful lot this past year. But here are some, I think, of my biggest reflections, and I'll go first on the micro level. You work in higher education and I've had the pleasure of working at diverse schools, from Brown University to pretty open access public institutions at the University of Southern Maine years ago. And so over the years, I've seen a vast array of students from, kind of working class, first generation, part-time adult students to, those students that have the privilege of coming from families with ample resources and all of the preparation in the world. And what was the most striking thing across the board was that the diversity of our students, regardless as to economically where they sat, this pandemic has been difficult for them on a very personal and heartfelt level. For poorer students, it's been in particular difficult because we discovered, for example, that we had students who had been operating without a laptop for a number of months because their laptop had died and they had not had the chance to purchase another one because they didn't have the resources. And so they had to literally be writing all of their papers on an iPhone. And then we had international students who, according to our records, should have financially have been here with ample resources to not only live, but also pay tuition, find themselves where their governments had frozen their parents' bank accounts and that there were travel restrictions or that airline tickets to their country were no longer available because countries were closing down around the world. So the disruption within our student population was really heartfelt. And it was a very big eye opener for me as to how vulnerable our student population is. And even though we have a lot of resources, or we think we have a lot of resources for our student population at all levels, we found ourselves really struggling to find ways to meet the needs of the student population that we serve. And in some cases, that meant providing financial resources for plane tickets. In other cases, that meant giving somebody a laptop so they could actually have equipment that they could operate on. or even keeping our library open so that they had high-speed internet. On a personal reflection, that was really, for me, kind of an eye-opener. When we made the decision at Clark to um, suspend classes and move to a remote offering, I made the general assessment that most of our students had laptops and this was not going to be a problem. Yet we spent the next 2 to 3, 4 weeks really troubleshooting and solving these technical issues that our students had, and that revealed a wide array of issues that were masked really in our normal day-to-day operations. So I have a deeper respect for the commitment of our students as they come to the table to our institutions. I think on the macro level, on the larger scale issues, these moments in time are market shifting. And what I mean by that is that there are basic operating assumptions that every market works under. If you've taken a macroeconomics class, you know that the principle of reducing interest rates will grow productivity. And that seems to be kind of a pretty widely recognized kind of phenomenon. And most markets operate with these broad assumptions of how people and sectors will behave. I think what's going to happen here, and what's happened over the last, really since the middle of March in the United States, is that the market itself has been disrupted, and we don't really know where that disruption is yet. It has not yet fully revealed itself. So we know that there are many institutions, including my own, who have invested enormous amounts of resources in working through the pandemic. Clark estimates that its contributions to solving issues around the pandemic for our students ranged between $11 and $12 million, which is roughly about 8 to 9% of our operating budgets on an annual basis. And some institutions are putting the number as high as $100 million. So we know that there's a lot of financial contributions that many of our institutions have made to solving issues with the pandemic. What is still not known is how the market itself will be fundamentally reshaped and reconfigured, and what kind of operating assumptions that we're going to be working under. And that's both exciting and intimidating in the thing. So, I'm left at the end of 2020 with those two baseline reflections. One, on the micro level, that our students are much more vulnerable than we had ever assumed. And two, that we are living in a period of time where our baseline assumptions on how our industry operates are really being disrupted and challenged. And clarity there is probably several years away before we fully understand the impact of what's happened in the last 11 months or so.
Thanks so much, Lee. And yeah, that was the year that was. Glad to put it in the rearview mirror, as I think everybody is. One of the things I think we all walk away from in higher ed now is the realization that online education and distance education is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. Many of us knew that to begin with, but it kind of was in our faces. Those of us that come from traditional institutions have a history of working with faculties that sometimes were a little resistant to the idea of doing online, completely remote, asynchronous. They had to do it this year. And I think necessity is the mother of invention. So the realization that this is here to stay, I think, is a big takeaway for all of us in higher ed. I also think that brings to point the idea that the value is in the eyes of the consumer. We heard students' concerns about whether this was really worth the price. Is this really the experience I signed up for? And I think that's a legitimate concern that we should be aware of. And it does point us to look carefully at the kind of experience that we're delivering in the online environment. That it's not just everything is the same. We do have a lot of choices and a lot of opportunities to deliver something in an online environment that is distinctive and really enhances the learner's experience.
What's really interesting to me, and every time we kind of reflect or think back on the last year in a global pandemic, right? COVID-19. I remember I actually went in February of 2020 to the UPCEA um, conference that was in New Orleans, right? And so it was early in February of 2020, and it's so great to see everyone, all the stuff. You've been there, how great those experiences are. And coming back from that, obviously there was conversations there about, hey, this thing's going on overseas. What is anybody thinking about? Is anybody doing something? And come back from that, kind of get into the next week, and things just were escalating, right? There were more and more concerns and more issues. So having conversations internally in our department at MSU, I think we probably should start thinking about this. And there were already some things that were going on, but the story here is we actually sat down with a consultant and got perspective, right? and I looking back, it's the power of reflection, right? Hindsight's 2020. The message was from the consultant was, this is going to last. This is going to last for about 4 weeks, but to be safe, plan for 6 weeks, right? So plan for disruption for 6 weeks. So this is mid-February. On March 11th, I think it was, we went dark, right? We got about actually sitting in the committee meeting of folks from around campus who were saying, when this happens, what are we going to do? What are we doing? What kinds of things are we setting up? And, the email came out about 11 a.m. on March 11th from the president that said, okay, we're going dark, if you will. And as you can imagine, that created all kinds of questions. And what I remember most about it is I moseyed upstairs a couple floors in the building that we're in, and this advisor was coming down the hall, and you could just tell by the look on her face she was extremely upset, and she poked her head into another office, and I can't repeat most of the words that she said, but it was more or less, how in the world do they expect that we're going to be able to do these things in a remote and online environment? How are we going to do our job? How are we going to figure this out? And that question, if you will, or that concept came up so many times, and has come up so many times in the last year. Like, how are we going to get through this? What are we going to do? And keep in mind, we've been doing online programming and have had online courses for over 20 years. So it wasn't like we had to stand up a shop to produce. It wasn't like we had to, a lot of the things that if you weren't in this space, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. And another part of the reflection is in being able to talk to some of those people that were in those spaces that didn't have those things and what they had to do. It just really makes you appreciate the team of people that you work with every day. It makes you appreciate the other people that are in similar areas or complementary areas that, just said, hey, this is a forest fire, right? I've never held a fire hose, but how do I roll this thing out? I'm here to help. We stood up all kinds of different programming. We had to go and talk to tons of vendors and partners and extend contracts or create contracts, right? I mean, I think anybody who lived through this, who works in higher ed, knows what a monumental task that really is. So, I think just kind of, now that you have a few months to look back on and say, obviously there are things we could have done better. There are different approaches we could have taken. But I think my single biggest thing is just, when you're faced with an issue like this that's so huge, so unpredictable, the people that are around you are so important. Because yes, can an individual make a difference? Sure, but it takes a team of people to really be able to work through those issues. So I think my one word reflection would be just really appreciation is kind of where I end up, at least today, right? And looking back.
I have to say it has been a transformational year for the campus and for overall education academia. Having everyone has had to learn to teach as well as study and learn in a remote environment. Um, I agree that it hasn't been the easiest to have those learning experiences that we have all been used to in a remote environment, and not having a direct interaction with your professor, with your teacher, whether it's in kindergarten, it's in middle school, or it's in graduate, it's in higher education. But we have transformed. I think we've completed one academic year. We're almost getting close to completing one academic year. And it has taught us that if we can create a model to teach and learn pedagogically in this new environment, where it doesn't have to be all online, but a more hybrid style of teaching, we can actually utilize our resources and do a far greater outreach to the community. And once we perfect that model, I think there is an opportunity to actually make education more affordable and accessible for all. So that's where I look at it from a positive point of view. So like there's been a technological innovation that has actually hit the education industry finally, and people are waking up to that.
For me, 2020, it's funny because in 1991, 29 years ago, I started in a small admissions office in a school system that no longer exists. And I kept thinking things were difficult back then. And my God, this past year has been unlike any other year in higher education. And the optimism for me has always been with the support of data, metrics, looking at what's possible, what's not possible. That's really where my optimism comes from. And so part of that, and most of it was taken away last year because it's the worst possible year we could try to forecast. There is no metric. There is no template for this. And for the first time in higher education, we really, really were asking the question that we all should be asking along the way, but that is, what is in the best interest of the student? And now that question goes beyond academically, and it goes to their personal safety, and it goes to whether we should be having them in the classroom. Should we go online? We're making, all of these decisions for large groups of students that are high need. And it's just very, very difficult to be comfortable closing your eyes at night, making sure that you've made the right one for the majority of those folks. So I think, some introspection for me has been, it's been the hardest year to be able to truly help students exactly the way they need to be helped because of the pandemic and everything else going on.
Let's see, 2020. I mean, it's been, when I think about 2020, I think of I think of many things, but this incredible transformation, incredible resiliency, and really just this idea. I keep going back to this idea, and my team and I talk about this, that that old proverb of necessity is the mother of invention. And really that's been what this year has been about for us as a team. When I think about the actual last March, the crisis that we were in, and needing to very quickly pivot to all online courses, which is was mostly almost completely new, especially for a very studio-based art and design environment, that it was, we had to work through that crisis. But really thinking about the leadership that I needed to step into, and I considered myself a pretty good leader and a good manager prior to COVID, but it was this interesting time when I really had to dig deep and think about empathy and leadership and being a servant to my team, and really understanding individually and collectively what they needed in order to not just survive a crisis, but really lean into it and thrive during that crisis. And I would say, just in terms of one of my accomplishments looking back, that's one of that's one of the things that I'm probably most proud of, in terms of making sure that our team culture was collaborative, connected, supported. And even in the midst of those days when we felt like we couldn't accomplish what we needed to accomplish, we stuck together in that. And really, when you start to lean into that uncomfortable space, we emerge on the other side. And I would say we are on the other side as of January 2021, that we stuck together as a team, and we got through it, and we're so much stronger. And I would say there are members of my team that are so much stronger. So I would say it's this, when I think of 2020, I think of the incredible loss in terms of millions of people that have passed because of COVID. I also just think about this moment in time when, in some ways, this had to happen, and it happened this way. And we, as a team, were able to, like I said, really think about resiliency, and instead of being afraid of the transformation, that we decided as a team very early on that we were going to not just survive, but really innovate. And that's where we've created new programs, and our enrollment is up 30%. And we've reached this global adult audience that we never really, if you asked me a year ago, I never would have thought that in a year we would be in this space where we had this amazing audience. So it's been an incredible time, and it's something I'm really proud of. And I think that I can say for myself, and I can say for my team, that we'll look back on it, and we talk about, we use the word heroic, like the work that they did this past year was heroic. And so it's been an incredible year for so many reasons.
One of my observations from this last year, and I noticed this shortly after everybody went to remote learning, and it's just been reinforced, is how important the academic experiences, emphasis on experience for many students, which goes far beyond just learning stuff. And I think in many ways, higher education in this country has lost its way over the past couple of decades, because we've gone from talking about the social value and the benefit of higher education and how we help improve people's lives and how we help support the country broadly, to conversations now about just jobs. It's job training. And we've reduced a lot of higher education to just a conversation about job training. And in my view, that just isn't what it's about. If we look at the truly nationally transformative impact that higher education had as a result of the GI Bill, for example, we need to resume conversations like that about the future of this country and how higher education can help it. Now, no institution can do that on its own, and I'm certainly not Pollyannish enough to think that Excelsior can do it, but what we can do is we can really focus on helping to create holistic learning experiences for our students. So we know what that looks like for an 18-year-old, right? It's a college campus, it's dorms, it's drinking on Thursday nights, it's going to classes and hanging out with buddies. So what's it like for a 35-year-old? I think it's authentic, meaningful conversations. It's talking about jobs as one piece of the learning experience. It's also talking about personal growth. It's talking about increasing meaning. It's talking about connection with family and communities and engagement in the society in which people live and what that means. And it's talking about making a real difference in combating some of the national and global challenges that people are worrying about.